Have you ever truly wondered who your neighbors are? What hides behind their warm smiles and friendly greetings? There is no manual for recognizing danger in those around you, but experts agree. Those with psychopathic traits are more likely to commit violent crimes. When someone's behavior feels off, it is safer to keep your distance. This disturbing case begins with Brian and Beverly Mo, a couple that seemed to have it all. They were in love, financially stable, and enjoyed traveling and making memories together. But everything changed after they moved to a quiet new neighborhood. Soon after settling in, both were found dead inside their home. Blood left behind told a chilling story and pointed investigators straight to a nearby house. What they uncovered shocked even hardened detectives. Brian and Beverly first met in the spring of 2001 at a party held by a mutual friend. They were both college students. From the moment they spoke, there was a powerful connection. Their relationship grew quickly. That summer, they visited each other's families, introduced one another to their parents, and spoke openly about their future. Both families gave their full support, seeing how perfectly they fit together. Brian and Beverly had always loved adventure. They were drawn to excitement, movement, and challenge. Beverly was a gifted athlete. She played baseball, ran track, and had a beautiful voice on the guitar. She was also studying new languages and made friends easily with her radiant energy. Brian was more drawn to danger. He loved rock climbing, surfing, and diving. He was a true risk-taker who never feared the unknown. Each year, he chose a new place to explore and a new skill to master. When Brian and Beverly first spoke, they knew immediately that they understood one another. That bond turned into an intense, meaningful relationship. Together they traveled, skied, snowboarded, dived, and climbed. They lived for thrill and adventure, always side by side. Even though they loved each other deeply, they waited to marry. Education came first. After graduation, they saved for a house. Brian started working at an industrial company, and Beverly took a job as a hotel administrator, where her language skills were valuable. On May 15, 2006, they finally married. The ceremony was held by the ocean, with only close friends and family in attendance. Their honeymoon took them across several countries. When they returned, they bought a peaceful home in Graham, Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. It stood near a forest and river, a quiet, beautiful place for a future family. Brian worked as an engineer, and Beverly continued her translation work while studying for a second degree. They soon became familiar faces in their neighborhood, but their happiness would not last. On Saturday, November 17, 2007, around 8 a.m., Brian's friend Stephen came to the house. They had made plans to go fishing. Stephen knocked, but no one answered. Thinking Brian had overslept, he knocked again and waited. Still, there was only silence. Stephen waited in his car for half an hour, calling Brian over and over. But there was no answer. Frustrated and a bit disappointed, Stephen decided to go fishing alone. He had all his gear with him. What he did not know was that behind that closed door, something terrible had already happened. Later that day, still unable to reach Brian or Beverly, Stephen returned to their house. Again, no one answered the door. This time, a sense of worry pushed him to walk around the property. He peered through the windows, now uneasy. Brian was known for being responsible and punctual. It was not like him to disappear without a word. When Stephen reached the garage, he noticed the couple's car parked inside. This deepened his anxiety, though he tried to push away negative thoughts. Moving toward the living room window, he attempted to see inside. But it was already getting dark, and without lights on, visibility was poor. What little he could make out chilled him. The TV was face down on the floor, and nearby, something large and unmoving was lying on the ground. Stephen ran to his car, grabbed his fishing flashlight, and shined it into the living room. What he saw froze him with horror. Two bodies lay on the floor, partly covered by a blood-soaked blanket. One bare foot extended from one end, and a hand was visible from the other. Terrified, Stephen called emergency services and reported the scene. He waited outside for law enforcement to arrive, remaining close to the house. When officers got there, Stephen was the first to be questioned. He explained everything that had happened and expressed deep regret for not checking the windows earlier that morning when there had been no response from his friends. The front door had not been locked or forced open, raising immediate suspicion. Inside the living room, officers found the lifeless bodies of Brian and Beverly. Based on early assessments, both had been dead for over 12 hours. The cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds from a large-caliber firearm. Each victim had been shot 3 times, leaving no hope of survival. The killer had acted with precision and intent. But why? Nothing had been stolen. Phones, wallets, and even cash remained untouched. There were no signs of struggle, and aside from the bullet wounds, the bodies bore no other injuries. Investigators quickly realized this had not been a robbery, but either an execution or a personal vendetta. Yet no one could recall any enemies or serious problems in the couple's life. Evidence showed the bodies had been moved after death. Blood trails across the floor confirmed it. The killer had even tried to clean up, but not well. Smeared blood stains marked the walls and furniture, showing where the attack had unfolded. 6 spent shell casings were recovered at the scene. Oddly, the killer had not picked them up. Ballistics confirmed the shots came from a .22 caliber revolver. Both victims had been killed with the same weapon, and likely by one person. The intact lock told investigators that the killer had been let in. They believed Brian had answered the door, recognized the visitor, and allowed them inside. As he turned toward the living room, the killer pulled a gun and fired 3 shots into his back. One bullet struck the television, knocking it to the floor. The loud noise likely drew Beverly from the bedroom. Seeing her husband collapsed in blood and the armed intruder, she tried to flee. But she made it only a few steps before 3 bullets struck her down in the hallway. Her body was dragged into the living room and placed beside Brian's. Both were still in their pajamas, suggesting the crime took place early in the morning. No one could explain why the killer had covered the bodies with a blanket. The bloody drag marks showed a cleanup had been attempted, though it only made things worse. A large pool of blood nearby appeared to have been disturbed, as if someone tried to wipe it away. Behind the couch, police found a plastic broom. Its bristles were stiff and dark with dried blood. The handle was clean, likely wiped to remove fingerprints. The killer had used the broom to erase bloody shoe prints, scrubbing with care. Smudged fingerprints and palm prints covered walls and surfaces, but none were clear enough to identify. Despite the killer's effort to clean up, investigators knew the longer someone stays at a scene, the more evidence they leave behind. They were right. On the bloody blanket, a clue had gone unnoticed at first: a partial boot print. It was not left in blood, but stood out where the floor had only a light smear. The print showed clearly on the fabric. The blanket was sent to a lab. Forensic experts matched the tread to a rare kind of work boot, heavy duty, with a unique sole design. It turned out a local construction company in Clearfield County had recently bought several pairs of those exact boots. This lead allowed investigators to narrow down a list of possible suspects and begin interviews with the company's employees. Along with the shoe print, police found a palm print at the scene. At first, it looked like a breakthrough, but when the print was checked in police databases, there was no match. This told investigators that the killer had no criminal record and had never been fingerprinted before. Naturally, suspicion first fell on Stephen, the friend who had discovered the bodies. He had visited the crime scene twice in one day. This alone raised concerns. Stephen explained that he had assumed the couple was sleeping during his first visit, which was why he left. When he realized he was being treated as a suspect, he was stunned and offended. He said he had spent the day fishing alone by the river, but no one had seen him there, so he had no witness to back his story. Investigators reviewed traffic camera footage to check his timeline. The video confirmed he had gone to the fishing site and returned exactly as he said. His fingerprints did not match any found at the house, and tests for gunshot residue were negative. Stephen had no connection to the construction company, and a shoe print size did not match his. With no evidence linking him to the murders, Stephen was cleared of suspicion. Meanwhile, investigators went door to door, hoping neighbors had seen something useful. When they reached the house of Daniel and Jennifer Tavares, who lived across the street, they finally got a lead. Daniel opened the door and said his wife was at work, but he was willing to speak. Around 5:30 a.m. on the day of the murder, Daniel had heard loud sounds coming from the MO residence. At the time, he did not think much of it, but now realized they had been gunshots. He looked out the window and saw a white pickup truck parked near their house. He was certain it did not belong to Brian or Beverly. Moments later, he saw two men walk out of the house. Because of the low light, Daniel could not get a clear look at their faces. Still, he gave a detailed description of the truck's driver. He was a white male, about 40 years old, solidly built, with long dark hair tied in a ponytail and a mustache. Daniel also noticed a tattoo on the man's left hand, but he could not tell what it was. While the tip about the white pickup truck seemed promising, no other neighbors had seen it. Friends, family, and co-workers of Brian and Beverly could not identify anyone who matched the description or drove such a vehicle. The truck did not appear on any nearby traffic cameras, suggesting the suspects may have used hidden back roads to avoid detection. A countywide alert was issued, but no leads surfaced. Then, during a follow-up interview, Beverly's mother mentioned something crucial. A couple of months before the murder, Beverly had talked about a troubling neighbor, Jeremy Flint. Jeremy, 22, was already on law enforcement's radar for drug activity. His home saw a steady stream of shady visitors, and neighbors had long complained about his behavior. Detectives now had a new suspect, but when they went to question Jeremy, he was gone. It looked like he might have fled. Neighbors told police about a recent party hosted by Brian and Beverly. Jeremy, uninvited and high, crashed the event. He harassed women, picked fights, and created chaos. Before being forced out, he swore they would regret it. The next day, Brian and Beverly discovered that a phone and a gun with ammo had gone missing. They suspected Jeremy and confronted him at his house, demanding the items back and warning they would go to the police. Jeremy denied everything, but the following morning, the stolen items reappeared in their backyard. While the matter seemed settled, Beverly remained nervous and began urging Brian to consider moving. When Jeremy finally returned to town, police detained him for questioning. But it turned out he had been out of state visiting his parents the entire week. Multiple witnesses and surveillance footage confirmed his alibi. Forensics also ruled him out. His fingerprints and palm prints didn't match any at the scene. With no evidence tying him to the crime, Jeremy was eliminated as a suspect. With no leads left, detectives turned once again to Daniel Tavares, the only known witness. This time, his story changed. He now claimed to remember the suspects' clothing and even said one of them had a scar on his cheek. This contradicted his original statement, where he said the men wore hoodies that concealed their faces. When detectives asked him to point out the window he'd looked through, they realized something odd. Even in daylight, it was hard to see across the street. At dawn, it would have been nearly impossible. His story no longer made sense. Was Daniel hiding something? Could he have been involved? When asked about his shoes, Daniel presented several pairs, none matching the boot print found at the scene. Still, his shifting story and strange behavior raised alarms, prompting a deeper investigation into his background. What they found was chilling. Born in 1966, Daniel was the youngest of 4 children in a military family. His life unraveled early. At age 4, his parents divorced and his father abandoned the family. By high school, Daniel had dropped out and turned to crime and drugs. He was first arrested at 18 for robbery, but his estranged father intervened to get him probation. Despite this second chance, Daniel kept getting into trouble and served only light sentences. In the late 80s, Daniel moved to Florida to live with his father, who paid for rehab and helped him find work. But within months, Daniel was arrested again. His father gave up, and Daniel returned to his mother's home. His drug use worsened, and his mental health deteriorated. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, Daniel rarely took his meds properly. Instead, he mixed them with alcohol, triggering violent episodes. In July 1991, during a fight with his mother, Daniel snapped. He grabbed a knife and stabbed her nearly 30 times. She died on the spot. At trial, Daniel claimed voices had told him to do it, but experts said he understood his actions. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but was released on parole in 2006, years early. While in prison, Daniel began corresponding with Jennifer Freitas. They developed a relationship, and after his release, they married. Daniel moved into her home in the quiet town of Graham, the same area where the MO couple had settled. By moving states, Daniel had violated his parole. He should have been arrested, but due to a clerical error, his fingerprints had been removed from the criminal database. This mistake allowed him to go undetected, even after his bloody handprint was found at the crime scene. Digging deeper, detectives found out that Daniel had briefly worked at the construction company that purchased the rare work boots linked to the murders. But there still was not enough evidence to make an arrest. Investigators knew they had to proceed carefully. If Daniel or Jennifer suspected anything, they could disappear again. On November 24, 2007, Daniel Tavares was invited to the police station under the pretense of helping create composite sketches of the suspects. He agreed without hesitation and spent nearly an hour eagerly inventing descriptions and helping sketch faces of people who never existed. While he was occupied, another officer casually entered the room and mentioned they needed his fingerprints to rule him out as a suspect. Daniel paused, but agreed, confident there was nothing at the scene that could tie him to the murders. After the prints were taken, the officer mentioned something else. Investigators had found an unknown bloody handprint at the MO house. Daniel tensed up. He quickly claimed he had been friendly with Brian and Beverly, and that he often visited their home. It was possible, he said, that his fingerprints were left behind from a past visit. The officer stayed calm, noting that the handprint had been made in blood and clearly belonged to whoever committed the murders. A second detective then brought up Daniel's past. When asked about the crime that had sent him to prison, Daniel admitted he had killed his mother. But what shocked them most was his tone. He smiled as he described the attack in graphic detail, speaking with eerie pride. The room filled with a chilling silence. It was clear Daniel Tavares was no ordinary man. He was deeply disturbed. As Daniel spoke, forensic experts were running his prints through the system. When the results returned, they confirmed a perfect match with the bloody handprint found at the scene. Detectives confronted him immediately. The smug smile disappeared. Daniel exploded with anger. But before he could react further, officers restrained him and placed him under arrest. With nowhere left to run, Daniel confessed. That night, he had been drinking heavily at a bar and using powerful drugs. When he ran out of money, the staff kicked him out and threatened to call the police. Fueled by rage, Daniel remembered that he had given Brian M.O. a tattoo weeks earlier as a friendly gesture. But in his unstable state, Daniel decided that Brian owed him $50 for the tattoo, and he intended to collect. At around 5 a.m., he arrived at the M.O. residence armed with a revolver. The couple was still asleep. Brian answered the door, surprised and annoyed. When Daniel demanded money, Brian refused and told him to come back when sober. But Daniel pressed harder. To avoid conflict, Brian agreed to pay and turned to get the money. As he walked away, he made a comment Daniel found insulting. That was all it took. In a sudden burst of rage, Daniel pulled out his gun and fired 3 shots into Brian's back. The gunfire woke Beverly, who ran from the bedroom. She saw Brian lying in blood and Daniel standing over him, gun in hand. She turned to flee, but Daniel shot her 3 times before she could reach the door. She collapsed in the hallway. Realizing what he had done, Daniel returned home and confessed to Jennifer. What happened next was almost more disturbing. Jennifer did not seem surprised. Together, they went back to the crime scene. They moved Beverly's body next to Brian's and covered both with a blanket. Jennifer took charge of cleaning. She used a broom to sweep away bloody footprints and wipe down surfaces to eliminate fingerprints. But she missed one critical detail: Daniel's bloody handprint on the wall. After they finished, Daniel threw the revolver into a nearby river. Despite intensive searches, the weapon was never found. Daniel Tavares was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Jennifer, claiming she acted out of fear, received a 1-year sentence for tampering with evidence. Years later, in 2015, the full horror of Daniel's past emerged. New owners were renovating the home where Daniel had once lived with his mother. While digging the backyard, they uncovered human remains. Forensic testing revealed the victim was a young woman who had gone missing in 1990. Investigators learned that Daniel had developed romantic feelings for her. When she rejected him, he responded with lethal violence and buried her in the backyard. Her body remained hidden for over 2 decades. This final revelation earned Daniel a second life sentence.